I'm here with Mark Zvinderman, serial entrepreneur and university spin-out advisor. Mark, can you tell me about what's your thoughts on the kind of I guess the university spin out sort of at the moment and how it's kind of changed over the last decade?
I think it's moving in the right direction, is how I would summarize it. I set up my own spin out a very long time ago, 25 years ago, when there were no policies, systems, processes, and knowledge really on how to do it. So it took 3 years to get the spin out process completed, to put things in perspective. I think over the past 10 years, there's been an improvement in the support to young academics, so postdocs, people who are at the PhD stage. I think programs like Converge Challenge, for example, in Scotland, have done a fantastic job at training and informing people what is involved and how you identify, what technology can be commercialized. I think the universities have improved on the clarity that um, the equity stakes that they are looking to take in companies. In general, that equity stake has come down, which is a plus. So I think overall, if you compare it to where it was 10, 15 years ago, we're getting more spin outs. I think Scotland is doing overall a pretty good job in that regard.
Mm. And when it comes to equity as fuel, do you think, it's still kind of a problem, but kind of how it's kind of looked at and how it's, I guess, handled and dealt with? It's still kind of, I guess, it's not treated the right way, I guess you could put it.
Yes, I think the equity as fuel is one of the core points. So my methodology that my business brings into the market is around moonshots, and a lot of the university spinouts, in a way, are moonshot businesses because they are deep tech. They have science, they have technology that requires several years of development, and then it needs to get into the market. So you're usually looking at a 5 to 10 year timeline for those companies to become proper commercially successful businesses established in the market.
Mm.
So the fuel equity as fuel analogy is that at the moment equity is seen as this really valuable thing, and a lot of the advice around spin outs and startups is around equity as your most valuable asset. So don't give up too much equity. When people raise money, the phrasing is don't give up too much equity. When academics discuss spin outs and their equity stake in it, the conversation and the language is often around how much equity can I get? When the
Mm.
universities talk about equity, it's how much equity they want to keep. So equity is seen as an asset that people need to own in order for them to create the value out of it. The point that I make is that actually equity is what you need to grow the business. It's the fuel for growth. So
Mm.
universities and the kind of academic sector take an approach of I own X% equity, so therefore my stake is worth Y. In reality, when you start a business, you have 100% equity, and you can allocate that equity to bring in the management and the investors to actually get your science out of the lab, convert it into a product, find customers, build the entire business infrastructure that you need to build, and bring in the top quality people that you're going to need to build a successful business. So
Mm.
the friction point there is in I need to keep my equity because this is the value that I'm going to get out of it, which is a fixed kind of pie mindset. The
Yeah,
pie
it
is a
is. Yeah.
fixed size. How much of the pie is mine? A growth mindset, if I can use that cliche, is this pie needs to become 100,000 times bigger. So whether or not the size of your slice isn't actually that important. It's how you use the pie to grow the business.
It's an interesting one because I know there's been a few battles I've heard about how there've been people trying to get the IP from universities like the spin outs because of they've given up or I don't know exactly what's happened because it's just what I understand is that they've given up. It's to do with the equity and how much they've given up, and they're trying to, but also is to do with the IP and there's things they can't do, and if they do use it, they have to pay the university something, and they don't want to do that. Is that kind of also kind of part of this sort of problem, or is that kind of not really a problem? It kind of goes back to that fixed mindset thing.
I think the problem starts right at the beginning on how the conversations are framed. So the universities have reduced the equity that they tend to take now to round about the 20% in Scotland. There's a bit of variety there, but it's not too far off. Ideally, you want to bring that down a little bit so you have more equity available, but that's where it sits. The process is the problem. So I've worked as commercial champion with different universities in Scotland over the past 8 years or so.
Mm.
And what tends to happen is a commercial champion is funded usually through a Scottish Enterprise grant. So Scottish Enterprise has the High Growth Spin Out program, which is, by the way, a brilliant program in many ways. And they bring in a commercial person like myself to help the academic team in spinning out the business. The university's approach to this is a lot along the lines of this is the kind of equity we're taking, 20%. Now go and negotiate amongst the team what the rest of the business should look like.
Mm.
And I think there is an opportunity there to improve that because from the commercial perspective, you're thinking about future management team members, funding rounds, Series A, Series B, all the growth that you need to fund, crossing the chasm, the bit where you go from early adopters to trying to conquer the rest of the market. So as a commercial person, I'm thinking about that whole path going forward. In the mix, you then have PhDs or postdocs who in the university hierarchy sit below professors or PIs, and
Mm.
they don't have a lot of power or control over their life and career in general. And they're trying to negotiate an equity stake without creating a conflicting relationship with their supervisors. And then you have professors who've worked for 10 or 15 years, which is quite common, and who have no commercial experience, and they see this as theirs. They're in an unknown environment, negotiating equity, license deals, commercial terms. They fear losing control probably, and they're getting a lot of talk in their ears that people will try to take your equity. You need to negotiate hard. So you get these different parties with their own perspectives coming together, and the
Mm.
universities at the moment are basically saying, "This is a little bit tricky. We'll take a 20% chunk, and the rest is for you guys to decide what you want to do with it." And I think there's an opportunity there for universities to say, to build on that framework and say, look, this is a successful structure that works for a growing, scaling company. So what kind of business could this be? Are we
Mm.
looking at a 10 million business, a 100 million business, a potential unicorn? What is the ambitions of the team? And then therefore, how do we best use the equity to create the structure that
Mm.
would enable that kind of goal to become reality? So I think there is, at the moment, it's a bit too standoffish. And I think there is an opportunity there for universities to provide more guidance and frameworks to facilitate that spin out process.
It's an interesting one because it seems like this standing off sort of competitive start doesn't really help, the future sort of viability of business because then it creates, there's the issues of, they're negotiating, but then there's the kind of thing of is that sort of they have the degree they're going through at the same time, or is that worry, probably if I do what the business sense is right, would that affect my sort of education and and it has that sort of I guess you could say conflict. Do you think there's like a way, I guess you could, I guess, streamline the process to kind of take the conflict out so students could be more comfortable with actually having the conversations that they need to have?
Yes, I think there are a number of um, options that need to happen. I think the first one is universities need to develop a full spin out framework, and that needs to include structures for high growth businesses. At the moment, the attitude is a little bit, if I can stick to my moonshot and rockets methodology, is once the rocket has cleared the tower, once the spin out has secured a seed round and it's off, it's ticked off as a success, right? We've got a spin out, the KPI has been met. But when Kennedy in the 60s, stood up and announced his moonshot, he didn't say, we're going to build a rocket that will clear the tower.
Mm.
The moonshot wasn't 100 feet high. The moonshot was, get to the moon and come back. So the universities need to be a bit more ambitious in what kind of impact do they want to create with their spin outs, and that means getting a bit more involved.
Mm.
There needs to be clarity. So I've been in businesses, I've built businesses, I've managed businesses, and one of the key things that causes stress in any kind of organization is a lack of clarity. So when you're negotiating from very different cultures,
Mm.
and the academic culture, the business culture, everybody recognizes are very different. Now, we have brilliant universities. So what we don't want to do is tell them, you need to change and become more business-like. I don't think that's the answer. What we need to do is say, these are the rules by which the game is going to be played. And if you don't like that, don't do it. So if you're a university and you say, we're going to take 20% equity, everybody knows right from the start, that's what's going to happen. So if you don't like that, don't spin out a business. So equally, we need to have a rule that says, if you are an academic and your research leads to a spin out, but you don't join that business, you can have a maximum of 3% equity in that company, because the rest of the equity needs to be available for the people who are actually going to build and grow the company. If you want to join that business, brings me to point number 2, and this is a much more complicated issue.
Mm.
We need to create better pathways for academics to move from academia into spin-outs with
Okay.
the option of returning to academia. So we need better frameworks for universities that cover the entire spin-out process. We need to limit and clarify the equity that academics can have if they don't join the business as a full-time founder. And we need to create a pathway for all academics to join a spin-out based on their research, with the option of returning to the university after a certain period of time.
All right, that sounds very complicated. And do you think that's kind of a university by university sort of decision, or do you think that should be more, I guess, policy top down, kind of saying this needs to be kind of implemented, like the government kind of, so the Scottish government kind of needs to kind of influence the policy that kind of influences how universities are framing their businesses, because we have the government pushing for more startups, scale ups, but there's not really in that conversation around actually what can the universities do. It's more about
Mhm.
scaling up stage and accelerators and incubators, which is another conversation you could have.
It is. I think so. I think it's easy to. I think the short answer is yes. I do think government guidance and policy is important, but I don't think. I think it's an application of responsibility to simply
Hmm.
say, well, it's up to the government. I think everybody has to play their part. I also think all the accelerators and incubators, they all play a part in this. But the comparison or the analogy that I often make is with a skyscraper. If you want to build a scale up company, that's a 40-story skyscraper. If you're only going to pour 20 centimeter of foundations, that's great for a garden shed, but it's not going to sustain a skyscraper. Now, that doesn't mean the foundations are the only thing you need. You need great leaders, you need people putting in the electrics, you need construction workers, you need a lot of other things. So the ecosystem is required to build these scale ups. But if we don't get those foundations right, it's really, really difficult. So I think from some things are easy to do. Universities can, they can simply say, if you're not going to join the spin out, you can have 3% equity. That's what MIT has done in the States. It's very clear. You want to join spin out, brilliant. If you don't, you can have 3%. Now, the second point that I mentioned is more complicated, and getting people to move into a spin out would increase the quality of their spin outs. There are brilliant academics, professors that I've worked with who won't move into a spin out for the obvious reasons of job security and losing the post that they have. But the
Mm.
spin out would benefit from their technical expertise and experience and their management expertise. So that pathway is trickier and involves pension retaining and how we measure academic success through REF, which is, obviously a big issue for academics. So I think from the government down, to get back to your original question, at the moment, we're spending too much time on looking at the number of spinouts that are being created.
Mm.
And that's where a lot of the KPIs are. But it brings me to the core question of why are we actually creating spinouts? Is it because we have a KPI, or is it because what we want to do is create a prosperous and healthy society?
Mm.
Because high growth companies employ people in high growth jobs, and they spend their money, they pay their taxes, they lead to other high street jobs. And that creates a much more wealthy society. Plus, the technologies and the solutions those companies are delivering are actually going to make it into the world and have an impact there. So, the impact of spin out should be measured over a 5 to 10 year period.
Mm.
And I think if we could get 4 or 5 universities to take that as a trial and say, instead of just looking at how many spinouts did we create, what impact do we want to create over a 5, 10 year time frame? How many jobs do we want to create? I spoke to somebody last year, and he mentioned to me a number, if I remember it correctly, that in one particular council area, the child poverty rate is very high. If you could create 300 or 400 jobs, that would probably solve the child poverty in that council area. This is what we are actually trying to do. We are not trying to meet KPIs or argue over IP. We are actually trying to create economic wealth and success for Scotland. And we can't do that on 20 centimeters of foundation. We need to make sure we get the foundations right. And I think that's where the focus needs to be.
It's an interesting one then, because that kind of leads to the whole, I guess, question. It's not something I was going to ask, but it kind of leads into that. It kind of leads into the whole policy around the fight to kind of tackle and eradicate homelessness and child poverty, as you were saying. But there's a housing crisis, it's increased. And it sounds like, if policy, or I guess you could say the funding was kind of better placed to help these spin outs to actually create the jobs, that it would eradicate in the council area.
I think so,
What you're
because
saying.
ultimately, when people are employed, they can feed their kids.
Mm.
The number of people in Scotland who have skipped a meal, I don't know what the statistic was, but it's very, very high. It's not a small percentage. People who skipping meals just to make sure that their kids can have 3 meals a day is way, way too high. So we have a we have an interesting friction in Scotland, which is, on the one hand, we have a government and Scottish enterprise who are a major player, of course, in the Scottish innovation ecosystem, who are trying to do an awful lot of good things, but they're coming at it quite often from a very cautious corporate approach. And that's understandable. It's public money. So there is a scrutiny on how this money is spent, how this money is used. Whereas in an entrepreneurial environment, what you want is a much higher risk rate.
Mm.
And I don't think there is a solution. I don't think there is a silver bullet for that. I think you sent me an article yesterday with a previous conversation you had. This concept of just giving people some money and let them get on with it,
Mm.
right? There is a huge amount of money and resources dedicated to monitoring grant funding in Scotland. And actually, the people who work in this entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, they all want to do the right thing, but they are drowning in paperwork and business plans. And I've worked for many pre-spin out projects now as a commercial champion. In one case, I was asked for a 10-year monthly cash flow projection.
Yeah.
And even last year, I worked on a project where the question was a 5-year financial projection for a company that doesn't exist yet, for a product that doesn't exist yet. And you think the investors aren't asking for this. Investors want to see, is there IP? Yes. Is it credible? Looks like it. Do the academics know what they're doing? Yes. And does the commercial team look like they could steer this towards some kind of commercial success in the future? That's what they invest in, not in a 5-year cash flow projection with what my sales are going to be and the margin is going to be 4 or 5 years from today. So there is that corporate large organization monitoring of funding, that if that was reduced and if there was a higher acceptance of risk, there would be more money available to give to companies. I really apologize, I forgot the name of the person you interviewed there, but
Andrew
give people
Williams, Scotland is that was.
Andrew William, give people 25K in 6 months and let them get on with it. And I guarantee you people are going to make progress. It's a brilliant idea. It's exactly what we need.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. And it's one of these sort of things you're looking at going, you going to the corporate conversation is, are the investments that Scottish Enterprise, Scottish National Investment Bank, are they making it based on these 5-year financial, 10-year financial projections? And then as a result, they're not, and they're being cautious because they appear to be great on paper, they back them, and then unfortunately, they end up not working, and then you have these issues of business unfortunately failed, which is sad. And it's not really their fault. It's just them basing on the information they have. But if they can add more of that investor sort of mentality, and then kind of trust it more on the founders than the actual paper, and then kind of based on that, do you think that would also kind of, I guess, change the conversation, the way money is being raised and flowed, and also would increase, I guess, survivability of companies?
Yeah, I think the problem there is that I don't necessarily think, like, I know a lot of people in Scottish Enterprise and I've worked with many people there over the past 15, 20 years. I'm not 100% convinced they make the investment just based on a 5-year financial projection for a pre-spin out project.
Fair enough.
But I think a big part of that puzzle simply is the scrutiny they are under because it is public money. So I think a lot of them have worked for a long time. If you look at the High Growth Spin Out program, the team
Mm.
that runs it, they've worked with so many spin out projects, so many teams. They have a pretty good idea, just like investors do, of which projects are likely to come out and which ones aren't. So I do think that the plan is important, but I suspect the conversations they're having are very much like VCs are having, which is, which one of these people would we put our money in? I think the problem is a structural one.
Mm.
The and where I would like to see the efforts is there's a lot of one-to-one conversations I have with people who work at universities, with people at Scottish Enterprise, where people recognize the really big stumbling block at the moment is academic equity stakes in spin
Mhm.
out companies. So everybody wants high growth companies or hyper growth companies, scale ups, whatever we want to call them. But the stress point is when a commercial and academic team are left on their own devices to try and negotiate a spin out structure, coming at it from completely different culture, completely different angles. The universities are taking a step back because the TTOs are limited in what they can do, and the universities don't want to upset, and I think that maybe they don't want to upset the academic staff.
Mm.
But I think a big part of this is not so much. It's not that I think they don't have the courage or anything, but I think academic culture is around academic freedom,
Mm.
and that's what makes a university so great. And I don't think we want to change that. But a side effect, perhaps, of that is that professors, PIs are left to make their own decisions to a large extent. And so when it comes to negotiating these spin-out structures, what you will see, the commercial champion system that Scottish Enterprise has is really effective. But a lot of spin-outs are on their third, fourth, or fifth commercial champion to be a CEO of that company. That's not because the previous two, three, four commercial champions were terrible at commercializing research, but it is usually to do with the terms of setting up the business, doing the structure. Almost every week I have a conversation either with an academic founder, a TTO, or a commercial champion saying, I've just left, he, she has just left, the team has just fallen apart. And it's always around this negotiation around equity. So that is the one where I believe there is the fastest fix that we have available. Academic pathways, integrated career paths. There are lots of things we can do, policy changes that are going to take time. But the fastest evolving step we can do in the spin-out process is accepting that we need to create cap tables that allow companies to scale up and raise the money that they need to raise. And that is something where I think universities need to step up and say, we can do this, and where Scottish Enterprise can say to the universities, this is something we need to tackle.
And then going to the structure of things, which kind of leads into the policy thing, do you think when it comes to the whole risk thing, because you're saying potentially the issues is more to do with the structure and the pressure they're under because it's public money, which is all fair. Do you think, there needs to be a way that kind of lightens the load of the pressure? So basically, Scottish Enterprise, because it seems to be from the conversation I had with Andrew, but before, I guess, government involvement kind of got really heavy, what Scottish Enterprise was doing was great. But then as more government involvement got in and more public money, more scrutiny came under, it kind of became more like, because of the issues, it started to not be as effective as it used to be. And do you think, and because of that, it's kind of like it's accidentally kind of gone backwards than it's meant to be?
I think I sometimes compare Scottish Enterprise in Scotland as the cavalry. Whenever there is an innovation or growth problem, people go, well, Scottish Enterprise needs to do a program or needs to fund it or needs to do something. And so I don't think it's necessarily the fault, if that's the right word, of Scottish Enterprise. They are a well-established delivery mechanism for a lot of support. So when there are initiatives, the easiest way to get those initiatives to people, to companies, to universities is to use what you have in place already. And governments love big one-off projects that they can fund in one go. So I think Scottish Enterprise is a bit of a victim of being there.
Yeah,
and
it sounds
the
like it.
expectations on them are ever increasing. And I don't think that helps. I think governments, Scotland has a bit of a habit of, how to put this, trying to fund one big approach to innovation or startups or spin outs. And that's not a very innovative way of doing it.
No, it's not.
So a lot of money goes to one type of support because it's easy for a government to say, we're going to put 40 million into this, and that's going to help a lot of companies. But it means that everybody then needs to align with whoever got that big pot of money. Because if you're not aligned with that, you're not going to get your hands on any of that 40 million pounds. And the ecosystem is, as we know, full of people who make a living out of it. So it becomes less innovative. It's the same down here in England, where some people are calling for, quality standards for mentors and incubators and accelerators, but that tends to favor the larger organizations who have the admin to do that. Whereas what we really need is faster evolution. We need, if things don't work, that didn't work. And, personally, I have this view of an incubator or accelerator. If all the companies that come through your incubator are successful, you haven't run a very good incubator, because by definition, some of them should fail. And these founders should learn from it and then set up the next company or join another founder team and take their experience somewhere. So we need faster failing companies. Scotland has a very high proportion of zombie companies. Companies that are on their seventh or eighth rounds of some angel funds that are stuck in another 300,000 or 400,000 pounds. And they're not really going anywhere. They're not scaling, they're not growing, they're not setting the world on fire. And just pull the plug and let the team go do something else. And let them use that experience somewhere else. So we need a greater appetite for risk, I think.
Mm. And that's that. I was going to eventually get into the zombies, and so you kind of went there. But no, it's a thing of, is it goes to that thing of, if we pull the plug on the zombie companies, people lose jobs, and then it's all about jobs at the end of the day. So is there a way, I guess, if you think about it, that could zombie companies lose the funding, but then they could, I guess, process it so that they kind of to avoid that sort of collapse economically if all you did that, pulling the plug theoretically, that the person would be able to move on to something that been able to then create other jobs that would have replaced it, then potentially could be more innovative.
Right. I think it's a matter of having a higher turnover in the businesses that we set up.
Mm.
So if you go to the States, and I know we do this often, we look at America, but there
Yeah.
are lessons to be learned. A lot of academics in America are on their seventh or eighth spin out.
Mm.
A lot of startup founders, the idea that you would still be in the business you set up 20 years ago in America is almost inconceivable. Like, surely you should be on business number 12 at this stage.
Mm.
And I think we can learn something from that. The business you set up isn't going to be the only one. For an academic, set up a spin out, do it quickly, sit back, let the team take it forward, and set up another spin out. You can probably turn your research into 4 or 5 different spin outs.
Mm.
So we need to become a little bit more dynamic, because the more dynamic that is, the people. I mean, I'm not advocating for people losing their job, but if a business doesn't add value, if it can't stand on its own 2 feet after 7 years,
So adding
the
value to the
money
economy.
it shouldn't be there,
Yeah,
right? And
makes sense.
if we had a more dynamic ecosystem, the people who work there, they will find a job in another company, or they set up their own business. But the idea that somehow investors are there, or the government, which is even worse, are there to provide money to businesses just to keep them going, in general, it doesn't work. If a business doesn't add value to its customers,
Mm.
then it doesn't have a right to be there in the first place.
No, I totally agree. And it's kind of goes to that point of, if we had if the ecosystem wasn't as fragmented and it was more kind of connected, we would be able to kind of go, right. Unfortunately, the business, and the culture, I forgot about that, and the education was there. We would go, right, business has failed, right, let's move on. Instead, we have a culture that if we fail, it's seen as, it's bad. Then you criticize for it, you look down upon, or, you make a loss, and then it's the end of the world sort of thing, instead of, well, it happens, not everyone's perfect. They made a mistake and they didn't learn from it, or they made a mistake and
Yes,
it was too late to learn from it. So, but they learned for the next time.
the failing one is an interesting one, because my business went under in 2015, and um, it was a terrible, terrible event. Right, your business runs out of money, and in 2015, went into administration. Business got liquidated, and for me, it was the end of the world. It's like that year was not a good year.
Yeah.
But we kind of came out of it, and my business partner and I stuck our heads together, and we were like, well, we're entrepreneurs for 15 years, so we're basically unemployable at this point by everybody else. So we restarted the business. And the interesting thing is, absolutely nobody, and I mean nobody in the past 10 years, has ever even hinted at the fact that that was a failing in some kind of fashion. If anything, I do a lot of workshops. I mentor, I advise people. I do workshops at Converge Challenge every year. I spent years at the Hicks Centre for Innovation in Edinburgh, working with startups and spin out companies there. Whenever I talk about this, the only thing I get from people is interest. And I actually think, going on a tangent, it's something we should talk about, because I wasn't prepared for it. And like everything in life, it's a process. And once you're through it, you've learned something, and the whole world is open for you. So I had a project last year that I had very high hopes for. And, I passionately worked on it, and it just didn't happen. It failed. But almost immediately afterwards, there's 2 other things that land on your desk that you wouldn't have had the time for if that one project had worked out. So failure, sometimes things don't work out, and just cut your losses. And what you will find is all these fears you have, they don't really come to fruition. Now, for Scottish enterprise and the government and universities, those things tend to hit harder because they are a lot more sensitive to these failings. Not so much because I think the people there are, but because they know the scrutiny is going to be on them for the public money or the publicity. So it's a bit trickier for them. And because the Scottish ecosystem to such a large extent depends on the government and Scottish enterprise, that makes failing harder
Yeah.
because the funding bodies get hit hard when something fails. The people there, I think they get it. I really do. But as an organization, it's slightly different.
With regards to the ecosystem you were saying, it kind of leads to an interesting question of, do you think because the ecosystem is too reliant on public money, it's created this massive problem that if anything happens, it relies on the government. And we need to kind of get it back to a place where it's no longer reliant on money that's public or funded by elsewhere. It's kind of sustainable through investors, private money, or whatever. It's less kind of, yeah, publicly owned. It's more private. It's more connected in that sort of sense. That makes sense.
I think so. Yeah, no, it does. I think it's a problem. I think having lived and worked in Scotland for many, many years, and now having moved down to England, it's interesting. I live just north of Oxford, and there is no Scottish enterprise here. So a lot of the support is either unpaid or on purely commercial terms, and it makes people a lot more entrepreneurial. Now, that doesn't mean the support in Scotland isn't great. It's brilliant in Scotland if you can get a grant to help with your commercialization work or your early startup costs. But it does create this atmosphere of we need to try and get a grant for this.
Mm.
So I worked in Scotland for many, many years. And when you have a meeting with somebody and you go, oh, we should try X to train more commercial champions, the conversation often steers towards, I wonder if Scottish enterprise would pay for that, or I wonder if Scottish enterprise would have a grant for that, or if the government would pay for that.
Mhm.
And you don't get that conversation down here in England. It's like we should try to, get universities to do a different way of spinning out businesses. Which university would be willing to pay for that? Or how do we structure a commercial model? So I think, although I think some of the programs in Scotland are brilliant, there is the inevitability that a lot of the people I've seen setting up businesses have been through 4 or 5 incubators or accelerators. It's hard to get people to come into an entrepreneurship workshop in Scotland because they've already been to 5.
Mm.
And in order to get their next grant, they have to go and do another business plan workshop. So I've always worked very hard to make my workshops very different,
Mm.
knowing that the people in the room have probably already seen 4 team building workshops, 5 finance workshops, 6 pitching workshops, right? So at some point you have to go, why is this still useful for these people?
Yeah.
Hence going back to this point of just give them 25K and in 6 months' time tell me what you did with it, and get people in Scotland, founders, companies, everybody to take a bit of responsibility and go fundraising in London. Take the train, take the plane, cycle, whatever it is that you're going to do. Go to London, spend a week in London, go fundraising. Go to Berlin, go to Amsterdam, fly to New York. I know somebody who took the plane for a biotech company, and they spent 2 weeks in New York meeting with over 80 investors in New York and raised money at a much higher valuation than you can in Scotland. So this comes back to Scottish enterprise is the cavalry. There's a bit of an attitude of maybe the government / SE will fund this. And I think that needs to be a bit more, how can we do this ourselves? How
Mm.
do we pay for this ourselves? How do we invest in ourselves?
We need to move away from the lines on the SE and the government,
I think so.
which is an interesting, point actually when you think about it, because it kind of leads to the thing of, well, Yeah, it does because when you look at, government policy, especially in Scotland, it seems to be that a lot of the things are very influenced by what happens from the top down, and unfortunately, if for example, well, the council did that one. So for but no, yeah, the Catalans council. But no, so anyway, so it's decided from the top down, and because of that, it leads to this sort of you know, gray area of, can we do this, or are we stepping into, I guess, are we stepping into a place that we shouldn't be because of this has already been done by that, and if we do that, are people going to see the value in it because it's already been done? And you could argue, but so it's just creating another network. It's just creating another thing that copies this. What can we do that is new, that is innovative, that
Mhm.
is like replicating what already is there? And I guess,
Yeah.
what is there that we can do, let's say, that moves away and then creates more innovative sort of networks? Because well, that's another point, but not I'll go to that one later because it's too much if I did that.
I think, I mean, my own moonshot methodology, and was just starting a program in Oxford, the first cohort on the Moonshot Factory accelerator, is about reducing what you do and focusing entirely on what you need to do. So founders are absolutely bombarded with advice and guidance from all the different ecosystem participants. It's all well meant. Some of it's excellent advice, some of it isn't. That's inherent in any ecosystem.
Hmm.
But they're absolutely inundated with guidance, advice, and training, and workshops, and fireside chats, and inspirational talks, and you name it. And my point is, when you take the Moonshot methodology, once you know where you want to be, there is an awful lot you don't have to do and you
Hmm.
shouldn't be doing. So once Kennedy said we're going to the moon in 8 years' time, you don't need to build a space station because that's not going to help you. You don't need to figure out how to get to Mars because you're going to the moon. So once you know what you need to do and what the requirements are to get there, that creates an awful lot of focus. The the problem with it is it's hard because I did this in my own business. We went from a small time chemical supplier to running very large scale environmental remediation projects
Hmm.
in an industry, the oil industry, where those projects are very difficult and there's a huge amount of financial and regulatory risk and contractual issues. You can't just make that leap in one go. And hence, you create a moonshot, which is I'm here, but I would like to be there. And the problem you face when you go down a path like that is everybody loves to do so much stuff all the time. And when you become really focused, and I had this last year working on a project in Scotland, when people kind of got worried, well, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you should also be doing this, you should be talking to them. And it's like, no, because we know exactly where we're heading. We know exactly what we need to do over the next 12 months. And those particular elements are not going to contribute anything to what we need to do in order to move our project and our business forward. So I think it's about identifying and helping people identify what they actually need to do and then let them just do those things without all the pitching competitions and training and workshops and all that. It's great to get it once, but I worked with a postdoc last year who
Hmm.
said, I've done the training. I don't need another workshop on strategy. I would just like to be able to go into the university and actually do my work for a few days.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very heartfelt sentiment at the time, which is another training day. So we just need to get people to focus and get them to actually make progress rather than be in love with being a founder, which is lots of cool events and fireside chats and pitching competitions.
Then that leads into two things. It leads into the pitching competitions is because that's the only thing. It's not easy to do, and you have to feel like you could say well, you're preparing something that isn't necessarily, what's going to happen, because in 12 months' time, your business could pivot and it could be completely different from what you pitched.
I don't get the whole pitching thing. I mean, speaking to investors, the the quality of pitching has jumped over the past 6, 7 years, right? I mean, quality of the slides in general is very good, and people are very good at pitching. The problem is the pitch is only there to get you in the door.
Mm.
The pitch is really there. If I pitch my business at you, my aim is for you to go, that sounds interesting. I would like to know more. So when you're pitching to investors, what you're really saying is, this is who I am, this is what I do, please talk to me a bit more. And what investors consistently tell me is they can't have a conversation.
Yeah.
So the training is all about great pitches, and I've seen some amazing pitches. But then when you talk to people afterwards and you try to have a conversation, they basically repeat the pitch to you in slightly different wording 5, 6 times.
Mm.
And what you really want to do is have a conversation, a to and fro between two people trying to understand each other and how they feel about something. So that is a much harder skill to develop, which is why all these short-term incubators and accelerator programs are not that effective, because the people who go through it only get very short-term skill sets developed rather than the kind of harder, trickier stuff that they really need to raise money and to build a business.
But then again, that kind of goes to the whole thing of public money again. It goes to the thing of, these have been created by, I guess, they're tried test methods. So instead of having a longer term planning and thinking, longer term incubators such as, the Antler residency program, which is, you get like, or Y Combinator, the best 1% get in. And
Mm-hmm.
then because they're the best 1%, then they get, intensive training and then like teaching basically what to do, what is needed, and understanding of how to actually do it. They're getting
Yeah.
these short-term solutions that basically repeating everything. And that kind of goes to another part of the conversation, which is, do you think that we need to kind of create more incubators, or I guess residency programs that are kind of more like this London sort of pre-stage sort of residency, so that the best, or the ones that are able to, I guess, pitch, if we're gonna have to go talking about pitches and stuff, do it well, get through it so they can develop their business? Or is there maybe more of a solution so it helps everyone who has a great business idea, but then maybe there's one that can go a longer term that helps them kind of grow to become the founder
Mm-hmm.
that's able to get that London sort of interest?
I think so this is kind of ties a few things in. So first of all, a lot of these programs are so short term
Mm.
because the contracts for funding for those incubators are set up a certain way. So they need to do 2 or 3 cohorts a year. The program needs to be 3 months. They need to cover these things. It needs to end in a pitching event, etc., etc. So they're kind of tied into the requirements to say how many people will you train and what will the output be, rather than a longer term program. So the Higgs Centre for Innovation in Edinburgh, where my company, the Moonshot Factory, we ran for 7 years, the support and the training. And the team there was brilliant. They got this bit on especially deep tech companies, so university spinouts, but also startups who are developing robotics or space tech.
Mm.
They are not going to be held by a 3 month program.
No.
And so at the Higgs, it was 2 years. They got 1 year of more intensive support and training. And then there was another 12 months of mentoring. And I think that kind of prolonged period of support as they move through different stages of their business is so much more. I mean, I can get you pitch training. I can do it. We can call somebody. I'm not meaning to say that pitch training isn't useful or important, but I can take somebody who's terrible at pitching in 4 hours, and at the end of that 4 hours, you're good at pitching. So that's brilliant, and it's part of the whole thing. But actually developing a team and actually experiencing what it means when people say people management is difficult. It is. It's very difficult. I had a text conversation with the founder this morning, which was like, people, I was like, yep, I know, people.
Mm.
So actually being with this, so I'm talking to a few early stage VCs in London at the moment exactly about a long term support program, because one of the things that I don't understand is the lack of support for founders. They are trained to pitch, to fundraise, to get investment. But then on Monday morning, 9 o'clock, they open the laptop. They've got £1 million, £2 million in their bank account. And everybody goes, job done, well done. Just hire the people and, off you go, scaling up. And that's not how life works. And
No,
so a few early stage VCs are understanding they're bringing in coaching and mentoring and making that a small part of the company P&L overhead, and providing that ongoing 2-3 year long support to founders creates the entrepreneurs that we need. And if you have a coach, if you have a support program as an early stage tech company or spin out, it's not your board who have their own legal obligations. It's not the university who have their own obligations. It's not your management team who have their own agenda, but a completely independent outsider who's not looking for a job, who's not looking for equity, who's just there to talk to you once a month, once every other month, and say, this is what you're navigating through, and these are now the skills that you have to learn. So I think that kind of long-term support, that is a missed opportunity right now that personally I'm trying to rectify with the people I'm working. And I think there's opportunities there for sure.
yeah. There's two more questions because it goes back to the events thing. Do you think, part of the issue with the Scottish Enterprise thing is the events and stuff, the fireside chats, it leads to then that problem that founders are trying to avoid is chasing shiny objects syndrome. And because of that's what kind of, I guess, that's where they get support. That's what they're wanting because that's theoretically, you get the networks, you meet the right people, you get the investment. And it's kind of created this counterintuitive sort of, you have to chase these events to find the right people to get the investment. But if you didn't, if you had a long-term solution, you wouldn't be in that sort of situation.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great point because it's a difficult thing to navigate because events are useful. Your network is important, but at the same time, you also have to build a business. And hence my point on this moonshot methodology, which is once you know over the next 12 months, these are the things I need to achieve. That then tells you what events should you be going to. I mentored somebody years ago who was working in Earth observation, data analysis, and he was going to a lot of space tech events. And I was like, well, are your customers or the space tech companies? And it was like, no. And we realized that, his customers are probably insurance companies and finance companies. And he, bless him, pretty quickly picked up on this and then spent his time going to events for the finance industry because finance people who are helped by certain data analysis don't go to space tech events. Why would they? They're finance people. So I think, why are you going to this event is always the question you should ask. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier about the difficulty of having focus. A lot of people like to be seen to be going to events and be very busy. If you're not, then the question is, well, why are you not at this event? Because we never see you at these events. Are you actually working on your business? Which is, of course, a hilarious question because, yes, I'm working on my business. That's why I'm not at the event. So you have to find a bit of a balance. And I think, especially in Scotland, it's very important that there is a stage for you as a founder in your business to be at some of these events so
Yeah.
that people get to know you. But you also have to just at some point say to yourself, am I going to get value out of seeing the same people again? Or do I need to sit at my desk and actually get some work done?
Mm. And that kind of leads nicely into the last question, because what would you suggest, I guess, considering there's an election coming up and everything, and just in general, what do you think, let's say 5 things or 10 things, whatever, you think needs to change to make the ecosystem better? What do we need to do to kind of make things improve? If there's a
So
prescription you could offer.
I think, that question of how do we make the ecosystem better? I like to rephrase that always into how do we make the ecosystem healthier?
Okay.
And because the word ecosystem comes from nature, what is a healthy ecosystem? Is it a monoplantation of trees, or is it a jungle full of different things? And a healthy ecosystem is an incredibly varied mix of things. I have my own views and ideas on what I think is going to work, and it wouldn't take me more than 5 minutes to find somebody in my LinkedIn contacts who will say the opposite of what I'm saying.
That's a brilliant part of the conversation. We're wanting to spark
That
that
is what we need.
debate.
Debate, because debate leads to innovation
Yeah.
and trying and approaching different things. There isn't a silver bullet. So I would say don't fund one big thing and expect that to be the silver bullet. That is a monoculture approach
Hmm.
to innovation. And by definition, that can't be innovation. That's crazy. So we need a healthy, varied ecosystem. People need to take responsibility for themselves. Going back to the spin out side, there are elements of um, evolving what we have now, which is already way better than it was 10 years ago, but it needs to evolve. Some elements can be easily done. Setting a maximum amount of equity to non-participating academic founders of 3%. The evidence is in, it's done in America, it works for MIT. If you're not going to join the business, you can't have more equity than that. The universities can create frameworks rather than saying to the entire team, sort it all out and figure it out amongst yourselves. They need to be more hands-on involved and say, here is a framework on how this is going to work going forward, so that the spin-outs move out faster.
Mm.
The HGSP, the High Growth Spin-Out Program, is actually a really, really excellent program, but it would have a higher rate of success if the universities would step up and say, this is what our spin-out structure is going to look like. Because these cultural barriers can't be overcome in the near future. They are ingrained in how universities operate and how business operates. So I think the framework for spinning out, maximize the equity for non-participating founders, and that leads to companies that have a much better chance of scaling up. So don't think there is one silver bullet for the Scottish ecosystem.
None of it is.
But yeah, whatever that is, but just clarity leads to success.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we are very good at painting beautiful pictures of skyscrapers, but we're not very good at making sure those foundations are ready to support a skyscraper. And that's where the work now needs to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for having me.